Good evening. I'm Janet Wilson. I have the pleasure of serving as the interim director of the School of Theater this year, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this multidisciplinary symposium on corporate environmental responsibility. The School of Theater and the Crossroads Project are producing this symposium to further our learning and to have the opportunity to respond to the issues raised by our production of Bhopal by Rahul Varma. The play closed yesterday afternoon in Westhoff Theater. Can I see a show of hands of people who attended the production? Oh, lovely. That's wonderful. Our format for this evening is that each of our presenters will speak briefly about their area of expertise, and then we will spend the rest of the evening in dialogue with you. And after that, there's a lovely reception in the lobby. But before bringing out our presenters, I would like to introduce Dr. James Major, Dean of the College of Fine Arts.
Thank you, and good evening. And on behalf of President Al Bowman, I'd like to welcome you, and he couldn't be with us this evening. Fine arts, when it's done well, it should bring together the campus and focus on particular issues. It's the opportunity, in particular for theater, where you can bridge the gap between issues of society and the arts. And there are often times that only the arts can speak to these issues in a way that's profound, as it was with Bhopal. And I'm excited to be a part of a college, an excellent college of fine arts that provides this kind of dialogue, particularly in Crossroads Theater. This is an exciting evening for me. It's been an exciting past week. I attended it on Friday afternoon and was blown away by the quality of the performance. And particularly in theater, when issues are presented well, you feel extremely uncomfortable. And it's often we get so used to being comfortable. And so I'm proud to be in a college that can make you uncomfortable. And I'm looking forward to the dialogue tonight. Janet, thank you.
Thank you very much. And next, I would like to welcome to the podium Dr. Leslie Sloan-Orr, who has served as the artistic director of the Crossroads Project for the past 10 years. This is our 10th anniversary. Leslie?
Thank you. Crossroads. I just can't begin to tell you just how happy I am today. It's just hard to believe that 10 years has passed already. And you know, when I think about Crossroads, I think about the Crossroads committee members. And we have basically all been here together for mostly all of the 10 years, working together and making it what it is today. What I would like to do right now is just point out some of the changes that we have undergone, and also just tell you some of the goals that we had from the very beginning. I know that in 2000, and that's very difficult to say, 2000 seems so long ago, but the very first Crossroads Open House happened on Thursday, November 16, 2000. And believe it or not, we had about 200 community members coming in to see what we were all about. And we also had, of course, ISU students and faculty and administrators there also, okay? And it was really, really interesting because we had this one goal of producing a play, a minority play, at least once a year, okay? And we accomplished that. And it's really been a lot of work, but it's been fun too, okay? But as we went along, we started looking more at our ISU community, the student body, okay, even professors, okay, administrators. And the reason we decided, at first, our first 3 plays were Black plays, okay, because we had studied the ISU community, and also we had looked into the Bloomington Normal community. And at that time, the largest minority group were African American. But I can say and proudly say that it didn't take long, I would say 2003, okay? And we saw a big increase in many minorities just right here on campus, from Mexicans, Hispanics, Latinos, Asian Americans, and we decided, the committee, we had gotten a committee together for Crossroads Theater, okay, and we decided, you know, we need to really address all people. So we stopped, and we thought about the plays that we were producing. And we really wanted to be a theater for all people. So from that point on, in 2003, we started doing a different minority play, okay? And so I don't want to just go through a whole list of them because they're in your program, our whole 12 plays in 10 years, okay? But we had at least 2 or 3 Hispanic, Latino plays. We had Asian American plays. In fact, we had a very wonderful guest artist, Shozo Sato, that we brought to town, okay? And he produced his own play that he had written, which was Othello's Passion, and it was just really wonderful. Other than that, we had also done Native American works, too. And we're just very, very proud because we say that we are a theater for all people. And I just want to say that I am very, very proud of the play that we have just produced. And I was so happy to see all the hands that had gone up, that you had seen Bhopal. Because when I look at Bhopal and I think about what the Crossroads Theater Committee had done, had gone out into the community and just really became a bridge for many to come in the Indian community. And that's what Crossroads Theater is all about. That's what we want to do. We definitely want to be a theater for all people. And through Bhopal, we were able to realize our dreams. And I just want to thank all of you for coming. And I want to thank you all for supporting Crossroads. And I want to just tell you about 2 changes that we are going through this year, okay? We have decided, especially with all of the different community outreach that we are doing now, that we would like to do more programming, more multicultural programming, and also interdepartmental programming, okay? So we have decided that we would like to change our name. Until now, we have been known as Crossroads Theater. But in 2010, the Crossroads Theater Committee got together, and we had looked at all of our different plays that we had done, and just a variety of different multicultural plays, okay? And we decided that maybe now is the time to change our name. And for that reason, from here on out, we shall be known as the Crossroads Project, okay? The second change that we will do, I already mentioned that, is that instead of producing a play each year, we'll produce a play every other year. And then in the alternate years, we're going to do all types of programming and of course, do outreach, inviting the communities and everyone. And I just think that the most important thing for me right now is that through Bhopal, I could actually see that we are a theater for all people. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. In a moment, I will introduce our panelists for this evening's symposium in the order that they are going to speak. However, there are longer bios in your program, and those are listed alphabetically. And now, please join me in welcoming our symposium speakers to the stage. Rahul Varma is our guest artist in residence and the playwright of Bhopal. Mudita Dave is a doctoral candidate at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where she teaches community health. Dr. Joan Brehm is an associate professor of sociology in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at ISU, and she has a research focus on the complex relationships between human societies and the environment that sustains them. Dr. Dale Fitzgibbons is an associate professor in the College of Business at ISU, and he teaches in the area of strategic management, leadership, teams, and organizational behavior using critical pedagogy, experiential exercises, and case studies. Dr. Tom Bierma is a professor of environmental health in the College of Applied Science and Technology at ISU, and he has a research focus on how businesses can reduce both pollution and costs simultaneously. Enid Cardinal is the director of the Office of Sustainability at ISU, and she is responsible for the initiation and facilitation of sustainability activities on campus and works with the community to identify partnership opportunities and to share information. Dr. Do-Yong Park is an associate professor of science education in the College of Education at ISU, and he works with the GLOBE program, Global Learning and Observations to Benefit the Environment, to educate science teachers. And finally, I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Gary Moore, producer of Week TV on Channel 10. And we will begin now with Rahul Varma.
I'd like to talk to you about why Bhopal. And there are two parts to it. Why Bhopal the explosion, why Bhopal the play. On that dreadful night, when the explosion occurred, within first 2 hours, more than 200 people were dead. In a couple more hours, 500. By the morning, 1,000. By the afternoon, 6,000. By the evening, numbers did not matter. And this was justified by the corporations and the government in the name of state and progress. And that's why Bhopal the explosion happened. As to why Bhopal the play, those who died, life ended for them. Those who somehow survived, nightmare has continued for them. Even today, mothers are giving birth to children, and mothers who were children at the time of that explosion, and now at an age that they are producing their own children, their children are inheriting deformities from their mothers from within their wombs, for no faults of theirs. That's why Bhopal the play. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Let me begin this with a personal narrative. The time was soon after midnight. Place was Bhopal in central India. A woman hurriedly tries to wake up her two sons. Older was about 16, and the younger one was nearly 11. There's mayhem downstairs, as they see their folks from their entire apartment have flooded on the streets, and they're running. They have no idea where they're running, but they can sense the fear. Their eyes are burning. Her children are vomiting. They're in a very, very delicate state. The 16-year-old goes down and starts his father's moped. Now this, I want you to think about a bicycle with a motor. And on this bicycle with a motor, the mother and the two children, they climb on. Frantically, they begin to follow the crowds somewhere out of the city, away from something that is making them so sick. They still have no idea what is it that is making them sick. On their way out, they see countless dead bodies, children crying, lost children, women wailing, people coughing blood, her own children very sick, streets littered with animal carcasses, and so on and on. As they passed through the dimly lit streets, the direction of the wind determined who lived, who died, and who would continue to suffer. This is part of the story that members of my immediate family lived through that December night in Bhopal. Nearly 500,000 people lived the same experience, some even worse. As Rahul just mentioned, beyond a point, the number didn't matter. And we have more than 20,000 people who were dead as a result of this big accident. A quarter century later, now from a community health perspective, we look at different facets of health, right? Now for the purposes of our function right now, we want to focus on physical and mental, also environmental health. So going on to the next slide, and we want to talk about physical health, the lingering effects in realms of the physical health. The effects are far-reaching. Pretty much every system in the human body was affected, and people continue to face the difficulties, the trauma. They live it every single day of their lives, those who survived, right? The debilitating effects, which included respiratory system, and people who were impacted, their lung function is diminished, and they have obstructive lung disease, and so on and so forth. Ophthalmic functions, which were impaired, include people had cataracts, and people vision was lost, and people had so many difficulties. They have chronic conjunctivitis, for instance. Other than that, there have been many, many genetic abnormalities, and the next slide, I believe, has pictures. There are children who are born with genetic abnormalities, children who require continuous physical therapy, which again we want to remember that it's not very much accessible, is expensive, right? So these are the kind of effects that are still lingering on. The incidence of birth defects, incidentally, in these areas is at least, they say, 10 times that one would find in similar socioeconomic populations. Now, talking about health challenges compels us to examine mental health, right? Now, talking about mental health, now the researchers, they classify 4 different categories of disorders that have kind of been resulted from exposure to methyl isocyanate in Bhopal. Post-traumatic stress disorder, again, we understand that results as a result of tremendous emotional stress under such circumstances. And people have emotional recall of events and anxiety and restlessness and so on and so forth. Pathological grief reactions, people still continue to be plagued by intense grief, depression, right? Suicide ideation, and so on and so on. The list really goes long. Emotional reactions to physical problems. Now, these were very, very prominent because victims who had physical problems, people with difficulties breathing or vision, and people who were not able to take care of their family, their loved ones, they developed feelings of depression, hostility. And per the narrative that has been described to me from my family members, they could see children lost because parents couldn't carry all of them to a safer place. There was difficulty. There were crowds. There were completely jam-packed streets, and there was all sorts of things that we can imagine. So elderly and young children, so many of them suffered because they were lost, and people couldn't really find them after the fact, the disaster. So, and of course, there's in such an event of such a magnitude, you can see that exacerbation of pre-existing psychiatric problems, and this is always what happens. So similarly, this is what also happened with Bhopal. Now, other than physical and mental health challenges, people continue to live the environmental impacts of Bhopal. And when you look at this picture, this is the erstwhile factory of Union Carbide, and there's a gaping hole. The wall has been broken at one point, and we can see that there are children who are playing cricket inside. the factory, the industrial site. Now, as we know, Union Carbide discontinued the operation at Bhopal following the disaster, but they did not completely clean up the industrial site, right? So the plant continues to leak heavy metals and toxic chemicals into the groundwater aquifers. Right? So that is a continuous source of pollution for potable water. So brownfields like these, again, point to us, and with immediate action, if we can get something generated in terms of immediate and efficient action to clean brownfields like these. And then going on, in summary, as far as public health is concerned, the existing public health infrastructure at the time this happened in Bhopal in 1984 was also not prepared to take any disaster like this. In summary, we want to try and understand that a disaster of this magnitude could have changed the nature of chemical industry and caused a re-examination of the necessity to produce such toxic chemicals in such proximity to human inhabitation. And hope that lessons that we learn from Bhopal are paid attention to, especially as India and other developing countries are on their path to industrialization. And we again want to remember that we want to balance, because our growing population demands certain things, a lot of things rather. So again, we want to find a balance at every level to make it sustainable. And so a lot more, I believe, remains to be done as far as community health is concerned, just so that we would have paid enough attention to the lessons that we have learned from Bhopal. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation to be part of this symposium. I was very excited when I learned of this. It's a wonderful activity to involve the interdisciplinary nature of everyone on the panel, so I'm honored to be part of this. I'm going to speak to you very briefly about watersheds and the role that they play in relationship to the incidents such as Bhopal. First, I'll show what is a watershed. Next slide. It's really primarily a geographic feature that drains water, sediment, dissolved materials, as well as toxic materials to some common outlet point along a stream channel. Typically, they are based upon natural topography and natural geography, but in urban areas, we also have to consider kind of engineered draining systems and how we restructure a landscape for human use. In terms of the value of a watershed, next slide. There's tremendous benefits from that. The most obvious is a primary source of drinking water for both humans and animals. Water is also the primary vehicle of contaminants. And as we've seen in Bhopal, the lasting effects of the actions from organizations like Union Carbide can be carried through that water. Due to the fact that watersheds are geographically structured to drain all water resources to a common point, that means that all contaminants that originate further up in a watershed can be carried within that water, and they're also drained to a common point. And this exposes people throughout the watershed, regardless of whether or not they're in close proximity to the source of contaminant. And the negative impacts of poor or contaminated water quality can spread throughout that area. The health risks from contaminated water quality are tremendous, as have been already noted. And incidents like Bhopal bring that to the stark reality. What's more important to also consider in this is the role of human actions. And human actions that affect a watershed originate in personal and societal values. And those actions include past, present, and future land and resource alterations and land uses. Value systems that often put the pursuit of economic gains or prioritizing profits over safety and environmental protection can lead to human actions that put water quality and therefore watersheds at tremendous risk. Water quality and the overall health of a watershed really needs to be a shared common value by all those who live, work, and play within the confines of that watershed. However, as the Bhopal example has shown, any specific value is not necessarily held equally by all. People often disagree over the relative goodness of or benefit to be derived from management activities, commodities, opportunities, and present and future uses. And so when we describe watershed benefits and values, it's therefore important to indicate which people, which communities of interest, and which communities of place share particular values. And whether widely or narrowly shared, values motivate human actions and human restraints on watersheds. And to understand how a watershed works from more of an ecological perspective, information on the human motivations that can be inferred from past, present, and possible future actions is really essential to that equation. And also, as was noted, the impacts from an incident like Bhopal carry forward for generations through the water flow within a watershed. The incidence of birth defects and other health issues that carry on today are definitely tied to how those chemicals have seeped into the groundwater and percolate through a watershed system. So in closing, to kind of demonstrate the universal value of this, concern for clean water and a healthy watershed is really a basic and universal human right. And I work on several watershed projects, one currently in northern Illinois, and their water quality is actually very high, and they're taking a very proactive stance. They're not waiting for something as traumatic as Bhopal or another incident to cause them concern to react, but rather be proactive. And they're trying to they formed a watershed management association and trying to represent this shared value of a healthy watershed and a healthy ecosystem, and encouraging actions that work to support that and actually protect the healthy water quality that they currently have versus trying to be more reactive to it. So with that, I will wrap it up. Thank you.
Good evening. At the risk of sounding like I am demonizing the Union Carbide Company, permit me to give you a little context to the Bhopal tragedy. Understand that it was neither unique nor a new experience for Union Carbide. The company had a long history of poor management and unsafe work conditions. For example, the Hawks Nest Tunnel disaster, which took place between 1927 and 1932, in a West Virginia project led by Union Carbide. During the construction of the tunnel, workers developed silicosis, a debilitating lung disease that was caused when they were not issued proper respirators. You might note that between 2/3 and 3/4 of those workers were African American. A congressional hearing placed the death toll at 476, while hundreds more were injured. Let's fast forward to tonight's topic, Bhopal. There's a lot of statistics about the number of people who were injured. I think it's less important to understand or dwell on how much havoc was wreaked there, but to note that Union Carbide didn't act very responsibly. In the 10 years between 1985 and 1994, Union Carbide had so many violations of chemical leaks and spills that their OSHA list is 36 pages long. 36 pages. And these were just the ones that were reported in 10 years. From my title, you might assume that I'm going to say is anti-profit or anti-corporation or even anti-capitalist. Nothing could be further from the truth. Is profit necessary? Unequivocally, yes. There's nothing wrong with profit. It is absolutely essential in a capitalist economy. But an equally important question is how much profit? And more importantly, at what cost does that profit come? Let me give you 3 examples of maximizing profit. Is it a good thing to add an extra nickel to your return on investment if it requires you to throw 1,000 people out of work and destroy a local economy? Is it more important to boost your earnings for next quarter by several $1 million if it requires that you not recall an automobile that you know is defective? Who does it serve when a drug company, in order to gain market share, sells a birth control device to 3 million women when they know it could cause pelvic inflammatory disease, spontaneous abortions, fetal disfigurement, or the death of a mother or baby? Each of those examples were corporate examples drawn from the literature. These are only 3 examples of profit maximization of the many, several hundred, perhaps thousands that I could describe to you, in which management makes decisions which are not in the best interest of their stakeholders. Most of them are not bad people, I don't think. They are embedded in an organizational culture where corporate performance takes precedence over customer health, employee well-being, or environmental protection. I offer you 4 solutions. One is we need to track corporate crime and develop a database that corporate crime is equivalent to the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting System, a detailed, timely, and centralized database that reports street offenses and is used by most enforcement agencies. So we have a database like this, run by the FBI, used by many local law enforcement agencies. We don't have one on corporate crime. And if you understand the difference between corporate crime and street crime, you'll see the need for that database. The social cost of street crime pales in comparison to that produced by corporate crime. The FBI estimates that white-collar crime costs the United States more than $300 billion annually, while street crimes like burglary and robbery is estimated at $3 to $4 billion annually, just about 1% of corporate crime. As citizens, we need to require our state's attorneys general to hold corporations accountable for their actions and revoke their charters with at least a 3 strikes law. 24 states now have some form of mandatory sentencing for habitual individual offenders. However, no states that I'm aware of have a similar law for corporations who have repeated offenses against citizens or the environment with no long-term repercussion. 3, we must pass state and federal legislation that would strip corporations of the rights and privileges of personhood, granted to them by what I call the Supreme Court case that changed the world. That was the Supreme Court case of Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad, decided in 1886. I won't bore you with the details, but if you look it up, you'll find out how corporations have become people. Publicly financed elections, number 4, publicly financed elections passed legislation that would overturn the 2010 Supreme Court case, Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission, which gives corporations the ability to pour as much money as they choose into municipal, state, and federal elections without anyone knowing who donated it. The Roberts Court, in a 5-4 decision, basically opened the money gateway, the money levy, to corporations without any accountability, I guess would be the best way to say it. We the people, remember that phrase, we the people? Give the corporation the right to exist by granting them a charter. In turn, we have the right to expect them not to endanger their customers, hurt or exploit their employees, or poison our communities, like Union Carbide did at Bhopal. In this age of managerial speculative capitalism, Wall Street bankers, investment funds, day traders, and stock analysts have a stranglehold on our economy and therefore on our society. They judge corporate performance on a limited number of factors within a very short time frame. We need to change the corporate culture that rewards executives when they make short-term decisions that are self-serving, to the exclusion of or detriment of other organizational stakeholders or the long-term viability of their own firm. Corporate goals have to be more than just about making your numbers, which is a very common expression in corporate America, making your numbers. Such behavior often leads to the worst kind of ethical decisions. As Jim Goodnight, the co-founder and CEO of the SaaS analytical software company, said, there's only one way to project our earnings to the penny for next quarter, and that's to cook the books. And that's what we often find. By the way, SAS has been on the Fortune list of 100 best companies to work for the entire 14 years that list has been compiled. For the last 2 years, they've been voted number 1. I find that list to be quite convincing because it's almost entirely made up of employee surveys, not investment bankers, not CEOs, but simple employees. Their for the last 2 years, they were been voted number one. Their turnover rate of software engineers, which is their bread and butter, is 2 to 3% instead of the usual 20%, which Jeff Pfeffer of Stanford University conservatively estimates saves them $60 to $80 million a year. In closing, tragedies like Bhopal, the Ford Pinto, and the Dalkin Shield, which were the 3 examples I used earlier, are entirely avoidable. We just need the political will to stop them. Thank you.
Good evening. My topic is what do you do with the Bhopal case in terms of education? So we put this situation into our environmental education. We just start with some of the facts about the Bhopal's disaster. As you noticed, probably some of you went to the theater play, and it's basically about the toxic chemical killed thousands of people. And next slide. This is the toxic gas that kills the 8,000 people, and then 22,000 people died, and then 300,000 people injured afterwards. Methyl isocyanate, this is the gas. It's a very clear and colorless, but yet it's sharp smelling, and a lot of people are having a problem with their breathing, and it causes asthma and all those diseases. Ultimately, they kill the people. And one of the things is that this gas is soluble in water, so it devastates the watershed and also the contaminated water, and that also devastates the entire community and also the environments in that area. So next one. This is the model we want to use, and when we educate the people in the environmental aspects. We'll discover the facts, the disaster, and then explore about the disaster, and then we teach each other, and then change the ultimate perspective and attitude of the people in the community and the entire world, and also the share with the facts and lessons we learn with the people in the world. Next. Because the environmental education is such a broad and in some level it's a fuzzy and ambiguous word, but we're not targeted at those 3 components: natural environment, and also the human beings and the ecosystem, so that we can live sustainably. So we need to educate the students, not only at school level, but also the community and the entire world. Next. As we are using the model, discover, explore, teach, and change, and then share ultimately with the people around the world. And through the steps that we are going through, and the peoples, basically the students at the school level, and then higher institution like ISU students, they raise their awareness of how deadly this gas can affect our life in terms of sustainability around the world. Next. One of the good programs right now we have is the GLOBE program, which has the 111 countries are a member of this program. This program is initiated by the former Mr. Al Gore, 1994. Afterward, the NASA and the NSF keep funding, still funding now, and it's an ongoing process. It's a very good tools and network entire world in terms of environmental education. Right now, over 20 million measurements of environmental data are stored in the web-based data bank. So in Bhopal's case, probably could get the data that comes from the Bhopal region, and probably if they have the GLOBE teachers paper in the Bhopal region, then they could store the measurement in that web-based data bank. Next. I personally use this GLOBE program to educate my students in my class and at the higher level, the higher ed institution. And we just do it annually. And these are the teachers that become a GLOBE teacher so they can go out and get the data, environmental data, and then bring that into the classroom, put it in the web-based data bank. This data can be shared with anyone who has access to internet. And so we can spread out and share the critical information we gather about the region that they live in and the community, and share the information with the people around the world. And why we're doing this, why we have to do, because we don't want to see the Bhopal case anymore. And this is the candle that makes there no more Bhopals. Thank you.
In the middle. Yeah. Thanks. If you saw the play, I think you probably felt, especially with the closing images of the children of Bhopal, what could I possibly do to prevent a tragedy like that? And what I felt was that I'm one of the luckiest people in the world because I have the opportunity to work in a profession whose job it is to prevent another Bhopal. The graduates of the environmental health major and the safety major here at ISU work every day to prevent conditions that harm people and harm the environment. But the curse of preventive careers is that the better job you do, the more quickly people forget what it is we're trying to prevent. So tragedies like Bhopal and many others around the world create an opportunity to build momentum, to give us another push down that path to prevention. So I'd like to briefly mention 3 important changes in the United States that came from the momentum created by Bhopal: law, public awareness, and an energized profession. First, a number of new federal laws made significant progress in requiring that companies understand what can go wrong with their plants and to take measures to prevent and respond to these problems. There are always some companies that want to go beyond regulation and others that will never comply. But for most companies, it's the law that determines their behavior. And I want to talk about one law in particular, EPCRA. Next slide, if you would. This leads to my second point, public awareness. Before Bhopal, I worked with a group that tried to get community right to know law passed in Illinois. The law would have allowed the public to know what chemicals were being used at the plants in their neighborhoods and how much of these chemicals were at those plants. And we were defeated every year. After Bhopal, Congress passed EPCRA, which requires companies to disclose this information. The information got reported in the press and eventually posted on websites, next slide, like Scorecard and TRI. And in my view, there's no law that's done more to reduce the use of highly toxic chemicals than this simple requirement to report it publicly. And I've heard many managers say, after seeing their information published in the news, find a way to stop using that chemical. This kind of momentum has energized the environmental health and safety profession. Next slide. These professionals work inside and outside of industry. They use the law, they use public awareness, They use basic principles of good business to control hazards posed by industry. Unfortunately, whether it's oil wells, coal mines, or even basic food safety, we clearly have a long way to go down the path to prevention. Thank you.
Guess I get the privilege and pressure of getting to go last to make sure to tie all the loose ends up. I'm one that does not like an audience to leave depressed. I like people to leave empowered. So hopefully with everything that you've heard tonight, you can see the bigger picture, and then afterwards and after all of our dialogue, you'll leave a little bit more empowered to believe that you have power to make change too. So, historically, the philosophy of business, as we have tragically seen and heard, is the business of business is business, justifying its existence simply because it makes profit, it generates revenue, it gives us economics, dollars. The character of I think it's Sarthi in the play, referenced trickle-down economics yesterday, and also that poverty was the biggest enemy. So alleviating poverty was what we first had to do, and that's what corporations bring. And that has typically been the historical mentality, that a corporation is doing this is the good it is bringing to community, and that is justifying its existence. As we've seen from this instance and from all of the tales we've heard up here, that's no longer acceptable. Corporations also exist as a social entity, especially given in the US that they are being treated as personhood. So they should also have those obligations. And we're seeing many corporations in the world that are operating with the philosophy of corporate social responsibility. It's even becoming so prominent, and it's that publicly recognized, that the International Organization of Standards, though it says ISO, has even created a certification for corporate social responsibility. I don't know that you can see the graphics on here, but what it shows is that every single thing that we've talked about tonight is interconnected. You need management that understands not only maximizing profit, not only cutting those costs is going to bring the best value to your business, understanding that having a workforce that's well taken care of, a community that is protected, and a product that you make is safe for its consumers and for the employees manufacturing it. So this is a step in the right direction, and I won't lie to you and say that there are perfect options out there right now. We're an imperfect society, we're imperfect people. But this is a step in the right direction, so what we need to do is start demanding this of more businesses. And I can name you hundreds of businesses that are really trying to do the right thing. Again, with imperfect information, we don't always act properly. The second thing, aside from just looking at this framework, is thinking of the triple bottom line. I love this quote. It's from a book called The Triple Bottom Line. I think it came out in 2006. A sustainable business should have a return on investment on all three bottom lines, not just on your profit margin, but on your value to society and on your value to the environment. So you should be able to see a positive ROI. This is a way to talk about making your earnings in a different way. Your earnings are also your license to exist in that society. And to show that this is possible, 3M, you might know them for first aid or medical supplies, the Scotch tape often, that's 3M, that corporation, has had a program in place since 1975 called Pollution Prevention Pays. Since they instituted this program, they have realized over $1 billion in savings just after, these are accrued over the first year they were implemented. And they have abated 2.6 billion pounds of pollution. So as Dr. Bierma pointed out, there's cost-saving measures to be had and also pollution to be avoided by doing the right thing and analyzing your systems properly. I can also point out, if you're interested, What is really important, as we were talking about the TRI and these databases, is transparency. So one of the major levels of corporate social responsibility is transparency and honesty. And if you ever want a really good example of a corporation that shows that, it's Chiquita Banana. Chiquita has a history. It was once called United Fruit Corporation, and if you're familiar with the terminology Banana Republic, that's largely where it came from, from some atrocities that were committed in the production of bananas in decades past. And they have since basically done a 180. And if you look at their corporate social responsibility reports, they will now tell you exactly what they're doing and exactly what they're doing wrong that they need to improve upon. And it's a really impressive way to operate their business. And if you also take a look at their stock performance, it's really been on the up and up in the last 4 years. I want to close with this quote from last night's, from the play from Bhopal. Corporations don't lose in courts, they lose in public scrutiny. And I think this is really, really important. It is a very insightful statement, and that is to say that we all have the power to demand of the companies that we purchase from, that we have our stocks invested in, that they be better corporate citizens, that if they are going to be recognized as a person, that they behave like one with a conscience. Thank you.